It's Sunday. You know what that means. Let's talk about the best decks to climb in Marvel Snap. Since it's a new season, there's a lot running around that is a little bit different from how it used to be. The card that has hit the metagame with the most force is Chamber, and Chamber is definitely a deck that is allowing an archetype, Ramp, that has typically not been incredibly elite in Marvel Snap to establish itself as a very powerful deck in this metagame. I think of this more as the you must be this tall to ride deck. It's just a very big deck that bricks a lot less than you think and is constantly capable of outputting a pretty reasonably large amount of power with Chamber added to the list. It finally feels like the trifecta of ramp, combo, and midrange has actually sort of been achieved, with ramp actually being able to straight up be bigger than most good cards decks that don't necessarily have synergy. Now, those good cards decks were largely being forced out of the meta by combo things already, but weirdly, they are kind of back if you build them synergistically enough. What this deck is limited on is total points. So if you are playing something that goes exponential against it, or even something that synergizes well enough, you should be in a good position to deal with what's going on here. Now, some people will play a Cosmic Ghost Rider instead of a Vision, perfectly viable thing to do. Some people will play a Valentina instead of a Jennifer Kale. I actually don't like that one because I think of Jenny as slightly reducing the amount of brick hands you have in this deck. Worst case scenario, going 5 into 5 is worth doing, whereas if you do not have a thing that ramps you into a 5, you can actually genuinely end up skipping turn 4. So I have ended up going back to the Jenny here, but Valentina is another card that solves that same issue. This is a deck that has a high amount of base power, a fairly large amount of consistency in accessing it, and frankly just says, if you're not taller than me, you probably aren't worth doing. An alternate build that's been creeping up recently that could end up supplanting it is, of course, the Nightmare list. One of the things this list does pretty well is it looks at some of the cards that this deck plays and realizes, hey, wait a minute, you know, I like the effects of a lot of these cards, but they also have some pretty great bodies on them. And of course, I would be happy to remove the effects from a couple of the cards that come along with the Nightmare package. This deck plays a lot of big guys. I'm not positive about the second thing going on here, though. I do think that it could be very reasonable, for example, to mess around with what big guys you run. But this is a deck that is challenging people in a way that I think is actually pretty similar to the way Surtur decks typically do. When I look at both of these ramp decks, those are what I do. These are just normal stats decks that get to a point that is pretty close to a combo level of output. But, and this is important, there are actually interactive pieces in here. Both of these decks benefit heavily not just from the existence of Chamber, but also from the change to War Machine that made it a much better card with Electro. That is the proximate cause behind why these decks are cropping up right now. Victoria Hand is still a pretty strong deck, but the fact that the ramp decks are able to consistently access the power output they are means that you're often under pressure to challenge multiple lanes consistently. Your nut draws, when they synergize, are going to be stronger than the ramp decks draws. For example, you are likely to win when you are copying a Victoria Hand, but you still do have to be aware of, especially when you're doing your copy Victoria Hand stuff, that you're exposing it to an Enchantress that probably will end up hitting it. Thinking about that positioning, i.e. don't get the Victoria Hand in the Electro lane if you can, because they're going to want to get rid of that if they have the option to get rid of that anyway. That kind of stuff is pretty important in this matchup. Your synergy scales higher than them, but they're playing at least Enchantress and maybe also Cosmic Ghost Rider, so they're going to try to turn off your synergy. And that's what makes those decks so dangerous, that even a deck like this that is very synergy heavy is not necessarily going to be able to beat them all of the time, because even though they are ramp decks, there is still interaction in them that can disrupt some of these synergies. Other than that, though, Victoria Hand is just flat excellent. There is a notable downside here with the ramp decks that they also aren't a deck that Shadow King is good against. This deck is still good, but its position at the top of the meta, where it was clearly doing the best things against everything that was happening, has been threatened by the emergence of these ramp decks against which its tech is not meaningful, and the only thing that is meaningful is stacking up points. When you're able to do that, you're going to win. But when you're not, you do have to worry about it. Here's where things really break down into a bunch of cooks, because the metagame as it is, I think the thing you're going to be wanting to build against most is probably the ramp deck, right? And when you build against that, a lot of what you end up leaning into is, how do I just combo them out of the game? So with the nerf to move, the biggest open sector in the metagame is, how do I combo people out of the game? What is the new best combo deck to do? I think this is an early contender. I'm not positive that it's going to be a permanent solution. It's quite difficult to play. I don't know if it'll trickle down, but this is what Derek has been playing. It is a absolute pile of cards with the end goal of, I'm going to make 40 power in 2 lanes on the final turn of the game. Or if you're not playing Shadow King, which none of the ramp decks are, I'm just going to win this matchup for free. So that's the basic premise here. I've talked a lot about Man Spider being a good card if you aren't vulnerable to Shadow King. Well, it turns out one way in which Shadow King can be attacked is other things in the metagame changing such that Shadow King is worse and people play him a little bit less. That is sort of what the ramp deck represents here. So this deck not only gets to beat the ramp deck, but also benefit from the way it impacts the metagame. This is also a deck that, even against decks with Shadow King in it, is going to be able to try to ramp really hard into a final turn point explosion and not be as vulnerable to Shadow King. So I think the combo sector of the metagame is a little bit up for grabs, and we're going to have to relitigate all of the things that were previously litigated that led to Move being clearly the best combo deck in the wake of the Human Torch nerf. I think Move, by the way, still probably good, but no longer unquestioned best in the sector. Interestingly, the same is also true of midrange, where V-Hand was previously at the top of the pack. As I've discussed, that was related to the metagame it was in. We were in a metagame where everything everyone was doing was Shadow Kingable and Deafening Chordable. Now that ramp is happening, that is not true. V-Hand gets worse, and now there's an even more open question when it comes to what the best mid-range deck is to answer what we're doing now. So I'm going to show you a couple of options being played by top players so you can get a sense of the various ways in which people are choosing to attack this metagame. This Sizer list is effectively the zombie list, but it's cutting the zombies in order to be a Shadow King deck on its own. This deck is trying to get points on the board, and against a ramp deck, what it will do is it will Cannonball Mercury you, it will have a bunch of points off of a Werewolf by Night, it is going to try to synergy its way to a win against ramp decks, tech its way to a win against combo decks, and generally try to exist in the middle of the range, as the mid-range decks tend to do. This is a great example of adapting to a metagame. Shadow King is still around, probably still the most popular tech card, even with the ramp stuff happening. Well, if you're the Derek list, you build in a way to make sure that your combo is not Shadow Kingable. If you're this list, you say, I'm getting rid of the zombie package. Yes, Annihilus is probably worse at doing points, but it doesn't absolutely eat it to a Shadow King. And that is how we adapt to metagames. Another example here is how Chamo has adapted to a metagame that is full of these ramp decks as well. This is a deck that is very similar to a lot of decks that I've showed on this channel, but the basic idea here is synergistic scaling points in the form of Captain America and Kraven and Hydra Stomper with the right tech built in. Cosmo is in here. It protects us from the people who are looking to Shadow King us. Our numbers are quite big. If we're synergying properly, we will have more numbers than the ramp decks. If we could start rolling downhill with Sam, Batroc, and Kraven, that plus a Hydra Stomper is an absolutely asinine amount of points. Juggernaut is as good as he has always been, especially against ramp decks that are very much playing one card most turns of the game. Redistributing your power has always been powerful, again, especially against ramp ramp decks, which tend to be very heavy commitments into certain lanes, so knowing whether you need to go somewhere or not go somewhere is extremely good in that matchup. You'll notice the Nocturne here. My instinct is that is a reaction to people who are doing magic-based combo decks as a way to go over the top of the ramp decks. There's maybe not a better option here. I get it. Like, it makes a lot of sense to me. So again, you see a different angle on attacking this metagame, where one deck was like, we should get Shadow King in here and tech our way to victory. The other deck was like, we will point our way to victory, and we will prevent people from Shadow Kinging us by being a Cosmo Juggernaut deck. The Iris deck, of course, taking advantage of exactly the same things here. Like, when I say exactly the same things, I mean these decks are cousins. They are doing the same exact thing. This is a list that Iris played all the way up to rank 2 last season. It is still just as good as it previously was, having a movable Madam Web Cosmo. Arguably, I think a lot of these decks are actually better than they previously were, where previously it's like this kind of stuff was pretty clearly second to V-Hand. Now V-Hand no longer has that incredible metagame positioning that put it as the best deck in the game. Metagame has shifted, and all of this stuff is now much more competitive. A couple of more synergistic combo-y decks. This is Cougar's build of Spider-Man Goirr, and it's doing exactly what you think it's trying to do. What we're trying to do is have a bazillion points and cheat as hard as we possibly can. And yeah, that's kind of the entire thing. You're trying to cheat as hard as you can, whether that be through Spider-Man Noir or through various impacts of Pixie. You just want free stuff as much as you can get it. Esme Kaku, all of that stuff. You're here for it. Free numbers, big numbers, no interaction. You're just trying to do some point vomit. This is a fine deck, but I've actually been fairly disappointed in the points output in games where Iron Man is not involved, especially in the context of the ramp stuff. You have full knowledge of whether you're going to win. I think in those matchups, your snaps are a lot more dangerous than theirs, but I'm not sure they're favored on win rate. It's just when you are doing what you want to do, you're a lot stronger than they are, but you don't know that you're going to do what you're going to do. And the ramp decks or V-Hand, they know what they're going to do every single game. Speaking of V-Hand, it's actually a pretty good deck there, largely because of Goirr being particularly good in that matchup, where he is not particularly good in several others that you may see. It's hard to figure Hela right now. I think it was pretty busted when V-Hand was at the top of the meta alone. I think right now it's still probably really good into every one of the mid-range decks that we talked about. I do wonder about point output with regards to ramp. Weirdly, I think Gambit is a pretty important card in that matchup because they basically don't play any cards that don't matter. Like, the few times I've played that matchup, Gambit has felt really impactful to me. And so I think that if there is a sort of matchup advantage here, you know, points on points, I think it's very reasonable to say that Hela, when it does its little combo thing, you know, a Gambit and a Hela in the same lane, then you Odin it or whatever, right? Like, a Corvus and a Hela in the same lane, then you Odin it or whatever. All of that stuff should put you over the top of the ramp deck most of the time. It's a little less confident than I'd like to be in terms of like, ooh, most of the time. I mean, the premise of this deck is that it does it all the time, but I think Hela's fairly reasonably positioned right now, even despite all of that. A large part of this is because of the nerf to this deck, and it has really taken the top off of the ways in which it plays. The biggest thing that this does, though, is throw the metagame back into chaos, because the previous metagame that we had was a result of this deck being just very clearly, after several weeks of combo decks fighting it out, the biggest and best of them. If you were playing a deck that didn't have interaction, you were just going to lose to this because it was a deck that had interaction and also more points than you. And a lot of that was down to Human Torch. And I think that it is still probably a very good deck. It's still just an incredibly dangerous deck in terms of just being a Cosmo Juggernaut deck that has all this stuff built into it. But it is less of a combo deck, and it is definitely less clearly the top end of that, which has put it in a position where if you are not, for example, drawing Human Torch against a ramp deck, they actually kind of will do more points than you. If you are, obviously, you know, everything's going great. But if you aren't, you actually do have to be pretty concerned about that, because Dagger, for example, scales off of the amount of things in a lane. They don't have 4 things in a lane unless there's a chamber there and you're losing that lane anyway. I don't care how big the Dagger even is. So this is a deck that does some interesting stuff. It does some cool stuff. It needs a little more beef, I think. But mostly what I'm getting at is this deck is probably still very good, but it's not prohibitively so. So you see a lot more exploration in terms of what combo decks are viable. I think Hela probably wouldn't stick around if Human Torch hadn't gotten nerfed. But now that it has, the ceiling is lower, and Hela is very good when other things have lower ceilings. This is largely the cause of the interregnum that we're in right now. I can't legally stop you from playing a Nimrod deck. It'll work. It's kind of doing the exact same thing Hela is doing. Like, it's kind of doing the exact same thing the other combo decks are doing. Like, you just go combo somebody. Like, there's really nothing else to say about this deck. Go do the thing that it says on the tin. Make giant Nimrods. Put 40 power in every lane. Say deal with this. You will beat the crap out of anything that isn't scaling with you. You'll beat the crap out of V-Hand, probably, give or take a Shadow King, give or take a Deafening Chord. You will beat the crap out of the ramp deck. As long as you draw well, you just do more numbers than them. That is the baseline premise of how this deck is built to succeed. There are decks that are pretty capped in terms of their output, and this deck is capped, but at a level significantly higher than the output it is trying to beat. Okay, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. I am not that sold on Weapon X. I think I'm just playing the old build to destroy. Like, yeah, it's cool. That's nice. It's maybe the best deck in Grand Arena. A lot of people are talking about Black Panther. I don't know that he goes in the actual destroy deck. And I think that a lot of that is down to, we're talking about ceiling, right? We're talking about ceiling, we're talking about Shadow King, we're talking about Deafening Chord, we're talking about cards that maybe, you know, not as impactful as they were last week, but are still pretty impactful. And this deck really wants to be a combo deck as best it can right now because that throne is sort of empty, right? Like, Move is no longer the combo deck of combo decks. This is a deck that can really combo hard with Deadpool stuff, especially with Agony. That's sort of where I'm at for this list. I think it's probably a better direction to go than the more incremental version of Weapon X type Destroy. Just be a combo deck. That's where I want Destroy to be right now. I don't want anything else from it. Give me the numbers. I care about the numbers. Let me have them. Speaking of combo decks, I just did a video on the superior PEEF list, and it is still damn good. Like, just a really underrated deck. It combos super, super high. I think if more people understood how this deck worked, and you should really check out the video I did with Jet, it is very, very helpful in getting this kind of stuff, they'd be a lot higher on this. Like, this is a deck that is extremely, extremely able to combo vastly higher than a lot of what people are building for right now. Yes, Shadow King is not good. Yes, Deafening Chord is not good. They are still relevant even if they're worse positioned, but I think this deck is legit. If I were able to pick a sleeper, and I know that by saying this, I make it not a sleeper anymore. I think this deck is absolutely a sleeper. I also think it will never be a sleeper in the real sense, though, because this is the kind of deck that requires so much of you that I genuinely don't think most people who play this game, maybe like 90% of them, will be well served picking it up and learning it and mastering it and all of that stuff. I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze in terms of the investment it takes to A, this is a really expensive deck, look at this, and B, learn all of the weird intricate things that are part of it. But it is, in my opinion, quite powerful. For me, a sleeper pick for a really, really powerful list right now. I think this could be one of the best in the game. It is that good at comboing. Arishem is Arishem. I mean, there are a couple builds, but this is the fun one, so we're putting the fun one on here. Chamber, Nick Fury, Isan. Just go have a blast. Go have a blast. I can't stop you from having fun with this deck. This is the most fun any Arishem deck has ever been, and Arishem, to me, is already a pretty fun archetype. I know I'm going to get killed for that in the comments, but I think this is a very solid list that does some very solid things, and I think you can get a lot out of it. I just don't know if it's actually exactly where I'd want to be right now. I like what this list does. I think it's nice that it does some big numbers. I think it's also possible that we want to be playing a more Arishem Thanos type of list, but this is a way to have fun with Chamber and to enjoy Isan and Nick Fury, cards that are basically pretty terrible otherwise, without being too embarrassed about it. Okay, so Jwala has been preaching the Thanos Cerebro gospel for a bit recently. In as much as this deck has a real reason to exist, the number one reason for it to exist is about 0 people expect to get Cerebroed out of a Thanos deck, so you could just get a lot of insanely free wins off of that. Of course, they might now, but who knows? The other thing is that this is sort of a Cerebro deck with a Thanos backup plan, meaning if you don't draw Cerebro, you're still doing like Blarval Thanos stuff. It's not the greatest in the world, but these cards are not actually that bad in terms of cards you want to play. They're not good, but you're still doing things with your energy. You are playing a reasonable game of Marvel Snap, and you have this Cerebro combo built in. Of course, I do think that it's important to note that this is at the honorary Destroy segment, the last deck on the tier list. That's why I'm putting this here. For actual Cerebro gamers, I think the list still looks a lot like this, and frankly, I think the list is still probably pretty good, and frankly, I'm a little bit afraid that we end up in an actual Cerebro metagame right now. Maybe those Nightmare decks that just naturally play Red Skull can head this off, but this is just a really scary deck to me. It always has been. When I look at this, I see Hela. When I look at Hela, I see Cerebro. Hela's good right now. Cerebro's good right now. It's one of those metas. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. If you follow me on Twitch, you might have noticed I haven't been streaming as much lately. It's been an absolutely crazy week. My girlfriend is getting surgery. She's going to be fine. Thank you for worrying. I assume you did. I recently adopted a new cat. She is currently living in a bathroom across the hall, getting used to us. So we're spending a lot of time in there, but also not trying to be, like intrusive to her, which means that I have spent a lot of time this week reading and playing Mountain Blade Bannerlord. Anyway, thank you so much for bearing with me. Not a permanent cessation of stream. I will absolutely be back. Just, it's been an absolute hell of a week. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I've been KMBest, and you have been phenomenal.